Hey there everybody, Aaron here, and welcome to this information section of videos that I'm going to be doing based off of the Goosebumps game that currently is running for Halloween. Now, first things first, I have to issue a spoiler alert as far as the game goes. I'm going to probably give a synopsis of some of the books that some of these creatures have come from. Creatures, objects, whatever. Um, but I most likely will not overall spoil anything about the books. But this could very well spoil what's in the game. So make sure that at this point for this episode, I should be putting this up after episode 6, I believe. Make sure that you have watched past episode 6 if you're concerned about having that spoiled for you. Otherwise, enjoy this short informational video about some of the stuff we've encountered. This first video is about the neighborhood and all the things we encounter within the neighborhood and like the woods and all that. The next video will be about the house, and the last video will be about the mall. So, and I don't consider that particularly spoilery. So, and timing wise, this should work out. We should have covered all of this stuff by the time you guys start getting these. So there will be 3 main videos here. I don't know how long they'll be. They're a lot more informal for me as I've just kind of looked stuff up after playing the game because I was curious to either remind myself about some of these things or learn about the ones that I didn't read the books for. And a lot of this section of this video, interestingly enough, is for stuff that I never actually really read the books for. So it should be an interesting time. To start off, we're going to take a look at the picture here. This is the back of the moving truck, and I'm just going to quickly go over things here. I'm not going to talk about the books much because these guys, none of these things really played that big of a role within the story. There's a bunch of nods in here to the different books. The first one that caught my eye because I remember the cover of this book. It was one I never read, but it's The Scarecrow, and that is a reference to The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, which was one of the earlier books, I believe. It's like the 6th book, maybe, or something like that. It's one of the earlier Goosebumps books. The next one is the Portrait of the Vampire, is a reference to Vampire's Breath, and as well as a bunch of other vampire-related things within the Goosebumps series, because vampires have occurred in a bunch of different books. The main book that they did it in was Vampire's Breath, but there's also short stories, and in the Choose Your Own Goosebumps books, vampires pop up a lot. The next one here would be the Sarcophagus of the Mummy, which is a reference to Return of the Mummy. But just like vampires, mummies have actually popped up in a couple of different things, Goosebumps, but that's the main one. And the last thing I'm going to talk about right now that we see in here is the shrunken head, and that pertains to the book How I Got My Shrunken Head. That one I did read, but I think I got it from the library because I don't have that book anymore. I actually have most of the Goosebumps books that I owned. I still have. I don't have them at my house. I have them at my parents' place, but I still have them around. Moving on from that, we have 2 other things here that I'm going to mention real quick, but will be talked about either a little later on in this video, or will be talked about in one of the next videos. And there's 2 more items here up at the top here, and I picked it up in the playthrough, was the Magician's Hat. That is a reference to a particular rabbit that we will talk about here pretty soon. And the other one is the glowing green jar in the center of the picture here. That is most likely monster's blood, would be my guess, or monster blood. And we'll talk about that in the house video. So the next video will have the monster blood stuff in it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about, or the next thing I should say, not the first, because we've gone over some of this already, but the first thing is we're going to take a closer look at it. It has to do with the Magician's Hat that I mentioned just a little bit ago, and the rabbit Amazo. That is actually for the book Bad Hair Day, and it is actually it is a book. Without going into a huge amount of spoilers, it's kind of already spoiled, I guess, to some extent because the rabbit reference is in here. But basically, it's about a little boy who wants to be a magician, and he idolizes a particular magician that lives locally. And the spoiler for that in the end is that the magician is actually trapped as a rabbit, and that is a Mazo, and he's even mentioned when we put the hat on him in the video, and he's here as I'm showing you. So that's basically the gist of that story. I mean, if you want more details of it, read the book or look it up online. The next thing we'll be looking at is I have these organized weirdly in my document now that I think about it. I should have probably put these more in chronological order encountered in the video. But the next thing we'll talk about real quick is The Beast from the East, which is from the book The Beast from the East. And that book is about a couple of kids that spend time in a foreign country. They go to play in these woods and they end up getting lost, and they encounter these creatures, which look just like this the Beast here. And they play an odd game of tag, basically. And ultimately, if it's one of those things, fairly obviously, if you fail at tag, you die. That kind of stuff. It's a little more complicated than that, I'm sure, but the big twist, I guess, at the end of this book, I'm not going to give you the specifics of how the kids get out of it, but the thing that's kind of referenced within the game here and the correlation is that when we use the haunted mask to scare him in the game, he mentioned something about we are a higher level player than him. So apparently the big thing is that within these beasts that play this game, there is a level hierarchy, and higher level players can do more complicated things or something like that. So that's what that is a reference to. I don't, they never. That's one of the things they don't really go into the specifics of for the most part, but that is one of the bigger things there. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about here is the plant zombie creature that we see very early on in the game in the forest or in the woods. And there's actually a death sequence that I didn't end up recording through one of the things when I was messing around. That medallion that we picked up earlier in the house apparently protects you from him. If you go into the forest without having it, he then kills you. We'll have another death scene or kill scene or whatever you want to call it. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what this is a reference for. I feel like the images that they used reminds me of a particular Goosebumps book, but after doing a bunch of looking and digging, I couldn't find anything that reminded me of that. So the only book I could think of, and I have read this one actually, which is Stay Out of the Basement. And that has to do with there's a couple the kids protagonists in the story, their father is a scientist, a botanist is probably a better description of it, but he's trying to create a certain kind of plant, and ultimately you find out that he ended up cloning himself, and this half plant half human clone started to continue his work, etc., etc. But that was the only thing I could find that actually had a kind of a plant zombie thing to it. So I don't know if that is what they're referencing here, to be honest, or not. I do remember reading that book. I believe it was one of the first ones I read that I remember reading. And I remember the actual Goosebumps episode for it pretty well, too. But like I said, I feel like there's something else to that I don't know. But that kind of covers everything we encountered in the neighborhood part of the game. That wasn't everything. There are references to other things that I don't know about. But I figured I didn't need to necessarily go over every little thing for you guys. If you're interested in finding out more, I would encourage you to go and at the very least check out the Goosebumps wiki. I have a link to it in the description below. That's where a lot of my information came from, / memories that I have from the books, the ones that I've read and things like that for the series. But that's where I've gone back to go through and refresh my memory about certain things and just read more information. If you want more in-depth, detailed versions of what happens in the books, you can find it there. So it's a good resource to use, and that, like I said, that's where I got all my stuff. Now, there are a couple things I want to mention before I end this video that happened. The biggest one is Mrs. Forrester and her dog. I feel like that's probably got to be a reference to something, especially since we never did see her in the book again. But I did some digging around and I couldn't honestly find anything within the wiki or online even that fit that. So I guess if you know what she's a reference to or have an idea, feel free to leave a comment below, and because I would certainly be interested in finding out. If you have any more information you want to share about any of this stuff or anything that I've missed, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I'll certainly see it if nothing else, and others that are watching this might be interested in what you have to say about it as well. So I encourage you to do that, and let me know if I messed something up. I don't think I did with anything I mentioned, but like I said, I'm not sure on all of it, and just don't know on others. Um, but there are any other number of references that I know are other references within the neighborhood part, and this will happen at the house and the mall as well. That are references to books that I never read, or there's so many references to different things in here. I'm just not going to talk about them, but feel you should also pick up the game and go and explore that stuff yourself a little bit more in depth. There's a lot of stuff that when I played this series you guys didn't see, not because I did it intentionally off screen or whatever, but just because of choices that I made, we didn't see every single ending and reference to all of the books. So um, it is what it is. But that's gonna do it for this episode. Hopefully you found this somewhat interesting. I have found it interesting to go through and see some of this stuff again. But the next episode we will cover the house and all of the craziness that goes on in there. At least the stuff that I immediately recognize as being from books, from the books or whatever, whatnot. So, as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.